We are back again after another international break, this time looking ahead to Coventry versus Blackburn. Well, not a bad start to the season, 9 games in and sitting top of the table with a fantastic run of games ending in 3-0, 4-0 and 5-0. Frank Lampard's men now look ahead to Blackburn at home. Some great performances all round and some welcomed clean sheets. The international break gives the squad a chance to rest up and get some key players back to fitness. Can Coventry re-fire up for a tricky 3-game week ahead? Blackburn, well, they've not had the start they would have wanted, currently sitting in 21st position. The team have been inconsistent on the pitch, and well, the results indicate that. A good 1-0 win away at Watford seems a lifetime ago, particularly after that 3-0 thumping to Charlton. That said, performances in the last 2 really picked up, albeit not getting the results they would have wanted. Certainly some talented players in that squad, but they'll need to start picking up points or the Blackburn manager will start to feel the heat. Now into lineouts. Coventry last out played a 4-2-3-1, which closer resembled a 4-4-2 with the addition of Thomas-Asante through the middle. A lineup that, when initially revealed, highlighted our lack of squad depth. That said, after a 5-0 win against a tricky Sheffield Wednesday squad, it's hard to pick fault with. With Torb and Eccles likely to return to full fitness over the international break, we may see some tweaks in that midfield. However, I'd expect Thomas-Asante to retain his spot. A player with a particularly good record versus Blackburn, scoring in both home and away matches last season. Blackburn last out played a 4-2-3-1 and have found some familiarity within the same squad 2 weeks in a row now, and particularly with some better performances versus Swansea. Notably, Blackburn have dropped some key players, Gay, Haji and Wharton, and we may potentially see another unchanged lineup. Potentially could see Haji coming in with a good showing in the Stoke game after coming on the sub, offering a more energetic and pressing game and certainly looked more promising. So let's look further into their tactical breakdown. Blackburn, much like most teams, sit deeper than Coventry, and whilst they don't sit by definition deep, they certainly don't play a high line, and like to close the gaps in behind the defence. Offensively, their average line is again deeper than Coventry's. This is slightly in part to their defensive structure, limiting their offensive activity. We'll cover more on that later. Average position-wise, a few key things to note. Defensively, you'll have 2 centre-backs covering deeper positions, but also their double pivot in midfield sitting deep as well. This provides defensive security, making them difficult to break down. Their front line remains very narrow, with 2 wing-backs offering the width. Notably, Cantwell, a key player for Blackburn, staying closer to the striker's position, being able to contribute moving forward. Now into their shots. Blackburn don't take too many from distance and will typically shoot when inside the box, with some very similar percentages to Coventry. That said, nowhere near the amount of chance creation. Pass-wise, you can see a tendency for shorter passing within their defensive and middle thirds, with longer passes being their best outlet into the final third, particularly with switches of play to find space. Their touch heat map indicates a tendency for the left-hand side, Cantwell often drifting into this position alongside Ryan Hedges to cause issues for the opposition. Average possession-wise, Blackburn are one of the lower teams in the division. In terms of accurate passes, they're again lower down on that list, with 76.8% accuracy. That said, whilst Coventry's averages are higher, with the change in system with Rodoni's absence, it's a difficult one to determine who will be the dominant team in possession. Looking at their forward play, Blackburn are on the lower end in touches in the opposition box and indicates their goal-scoring record and perhaps their position in the table. Whilst they don't get too many touches in the box, they're third in accurate crosses per match, so we can expect our defence to be kept busy. From a defensive point of view, they have a reasonably low XG conceded, sat in 17th, being a tricky defence to break down, and we can see they make the most tackles per match, with Coventry sat all the way down in 23rd for this one. Looking at their tackles, however, from the last 3 games, the majority of Blackburn's tackles are from the defensive position, so they're not an easy team to break down, in particular if you give them time to regroup. Looking further forward on the pitch, their expected goals, they're sat in 15th, but more worryingly, they're sat in 23rd for goals per match, and Blackburn fans will no doubt be concerned about their lack of forward threat. So how do Blackburn like to play? Well, we'll start without the ball. Whilst they set up in a 4-2-3-1 formation, they quickly drift into a 4-4-2. Something Coventry fans are all too familiar with. However, there's some differences here. The midfield typically don't press high up the pitch and instead sit back, closing the space between the midfield and the defence. The forward 2 again won't typically press and instead will look to block passing lanes and make it difficult for the opposition team to operate in that space. Some key examples here versus Swansea, the 4 midfielders dropping deep with the 2 attackers blocking those central passing lanes. The space between the midfield and the defence is tight and space appearing between the midfield and the forwards. Again, a deeper snapshot here, the 4 midfielders sitting deep to minimise that space between themselves and the defence. And without that space, it makes it difficult to break lines, and it stifles the opposition. That said, it limits them going forward too. With the ball, Blackburn will progress by retaining tight space between the defence and the midfield double pivot, allowing them to offer options in shorter, tighter passes, but also limiting the chances of quick breakaways for fast-pressing teams. The team is also split into two: defensive-minded positions that will stay tight and deeper, and then the forward players that offer a bit more creativity and will be more attacking in nature. Versus Stoke, we saw a lot in the first half where there were limited options moving forward and it limited their attack. That said, in the latter stages of the second half, where they were forced to be more attacking, being 1-0 down, they actually lost a lot of this structure, allowing them to be much more dangerous moving forward. Now, a key trait of Blackburn is you'll see the forward players staying narrow, seeking space in between the midfield and defence. But they'll also be very direct with this. Their width will be offered by their fullbacks, and they'll often find themselves a lot of space with those narrow wingers drifting players inside. One key player for Blackburn is Todd Cantwell, who forms part of the Blackburn's most threatening attacks in the form of quick transitions. It's something Frank Lampard's team have worked hard on this season to stop. Cantwell has that ability to find space, make creative and key passes, and also make tricky turns to bypass defenders and open teams up. He scored 3 goals already this season and an assist in there too. Certainly a watch out for quick transitional play, so nearly all of Blackburn's attacks will run through Cantwell. As mentioned, Blackburn typically opt for shorter, safer passes within their back line and middle third, and you'll not often see deeper penetrating passes through that midfield, and instead see a preference for longer switches of play for their wing-backs or attackers to chase onto, and this will typically result into a cross into the box. Coventry, on the other hand, will also set up in a 4-2-3-1. Now, we've seen some tactical changes over the last few games, and this is likely with the absence of key midfielder Jack Radoni. Typically, you would see Coventry build with more of a possession game, seeking to control the game in the opposition half, seek space out wide, and ultimately cross it into the box. Well, within the last few games, we've seen a much more direct, forward-thinking Coventry. And I think one of the better examples was that Millwall game, with the long ball up from Rushworth, simple flick on from Wright, chased down by Thomas-Asante, he rounded the keeper, put it back across, and Wright tapped it in. Similarly, Torp's goal versus Birmingham, it was a long goalkeeper kick, Sims chased it down and it bundled out towards Torp and he tapped it in. Of course, it's not all coming from the goalie, but you get the idea. It's a much more direct style of play. So just to give a comparison now on our last game versus Sheffield Wednesday and also the game versus Oxford. Now we can see from the stats that we actually had 49% possession versus Wednesday and won 5-0. Oxford, we had 63% possession and we drew 2-2. Now lots of factors to play it here, but what we're really interested in here is looking at the numbers of touches in the box. We had 38 touches in the box versus Wednesday and 39 touches versus Oxford. So even though we saw a lot less of the ball possession-wise, we're still very active in that opponent's penalty area and still creating a lot of chances. Thomas-Asante coming into that 10 role, well, he's a tricky player to pick up, and pulling up his heat map here, he's basically everywhere. With Blackburn looking to lock down that space in between the defence and the midfield, a player like Thomas-Asante will cause issues on keeping that space compact. He may also be a good support for Haji, who may need that support in the front line after returning back from the international duty. He could be suffering from a bit of fatigue or jet lag. Blackburn, well, they've conceded the most counter-attacking goals in the Championship, and it's something that Charlton exposed in their 3-0 win. They really seem to suffer against that forward and direct play. So I'd expect plenty of activity from Mason Clark, Thomas-Asante and Haji Wright being direct in these channels. Blackburn certainly seem more comfortable against teams that play around with the ball in front of the defence. A quick note on setups for Blackburn: with their narrow front line and progressive wing-backs, they'll have a challenge on their hands on turnovers with space opening up, particularly on the right-hand side, with Milan flying forward at every opportunity. And again, we saw this versus Millwall, so it's another watch out for Blackburn. A quick snapshot into the last games for both teams. Coventry's 5-0 win versus Sheffield Wednesday was impressive. Opposition teams are finding it hard to stop Coventry creating those chances, and with such good depth in goal-scoring options, it's a real challenge. Blackburn had their 1-1 draw versus Stoke. First half was really poor from them, and perhaps some similar story to a lot of the games this season. They look much better team in the latter stages, and if they can start a game like that, it will certainly be a threat. Into key players. For Coventry, it's going to be Haji Wright, difficult not to include being top scorer of the Championship and bang in form. Thomas-Asante, again, been in great form recently, great physicality, presses well and offers that direct threat. Mason Clark is a game where his trickery could cause a lot of issues down that left-hand side, particularly on quick breaks. Would like to see more from him. For Blackburn, we're going for Cantwell. Now, he's been Blackburn's best player so far, and even FootMob's rating he's the 4th best player in the Championship. If Coventry can lock him down, it will severely limit Blackburn's attack. Haji, he's offered some good play down the left-hand side, and he can even play left-back if required. He's top for Blackburn's expected goals, so certainly offers a threat. And finally, I'm going with a Haji. Whilst he may not start, I think he potentially offers a lot of threat, particularly to Coventry. Good pressing and can always create that threat. Now into predictions. Whilst Coventry have opted for more direct routes in recent games, I'm expecting Coventry to take control of the game in early stages, particularly with home advantage. We've recently been starting games very strong, and Blackburn, well, is the opposite. Coventry, they expect to play as much football within the opposition half and try and press really high up that pitch. Blackburn, I think, will be happy to try and soak up pressure in deeper areas and counter in transition with their key man Cantwell. Potentially, we could see a quite back and forth game similar to the Millwall game. I'd expect Blackburn to come back into the game and look more threatening in the last 20 minutes or so. The international break can sometimes create disjointedness, however, let's hope it's a good game. For score predictions, the match plot model is going for a 3-1 Coventry win. It's hard to predict against Coventry at the moment, and well, the model kind of backs that up. But as always, you let me know your thoughts on the game and final score predictions as well. Thanks for watching as always, and we will catch you for the next game.